Well, my next guests are here tonight to put a personal story to one of the biggest crises of our time, opioid addiction. This epidemic is currently claiming 116 American lives per day. And it's becoming harder and harder for us to turn a blind eye as many of these casualties are happening in and around our own families. The White House and local law enforcement are recognizing our country's addiction to painkillers and heroin, but how they plan to lower deaths and eradicate the drug problem still up for debate. The Gateway Foundation knows all of this firsthand. The Substance Abuse Treatment Center offers various services to tackle drug addiction and to help people get sober. Dr. Thomas Britton is with us tonight. He's the president and CEO of Gateway. Thanks for being here, Dr. Britton.
Thank you so much for having us.
Also tonight, we introduced you to Spencer. We're withholding his last name. At an early age, 13 years old, Spencer started using drugs, first marijuana, then cocaine. That all led to heroin. All this happening while living on Chicago's North Shore. The drugs got so bad, the arrests. He was kicked out of high school. For years after, Spencer was in and out of treatment, getting clean, and subsequently falling off the wagon. At age 25, Spencer had a heart attack, and he slipped into a coma. After months of physical therapy, which included learning how to use a fork again, Spencer went right back to using. But all that, is the past. After a stint at Gateway, Spencer just celebrated 1 year of being sober, and this story, his story, is one that's indicative of the thousands who are going through these similar situations right now, this very moment in this country. Spencer's here to share his story. Spencer, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start with you, Dr. Britton. This is, as I said, 116 American lives per day. Where are we with this? At Gateway, you have the ability to see firsthand what's happening as people are coming into treatment. As more and more politicians and mainstream media get a hold of this story and really shed light on it, is it accurate? Are we in the middle of an epidemic?
Yeah, without any question. Opiates as the primary drug of use currently has really changed the scope of addiction in the country. If you look back to the 80s with crack cocaine, if people use crack cocaine, they might get in trouble legally. Methamphetamine, same kind of thing. Prescription pills, same kind of thing. But with opiates, especially the synthetic opiates, people are dying, very, very quickly. In Chicago alone last year, over 1,500 people. That's twice as many people as were killed by gun violence.
When something is happening like this as an epidemic, and you mentioned crack cocaine, but when you talk about something that can kill people quickly, do you have to approach treatment differently? Do you have to change the way that you approach substance abuse in general?
That's a great question. One of the benefits of the field of addiction is as addiction medicine has progressed dramatically. So we have medical intervention that we can do now, Gateway does every single day, where, medicine alone is not enough to cure you from addiction. But it helps keep you alive, it helps with cravings, and it's a bridge to recovery. Mm-hmm. So we treat people with medical intervention, psychiatric intervention, and addiction medicine, and that wasn't available even 10 years ago.
A lot of what we're going to hear from Spencer tonight, and also many people who go through addiction treatment, will talk about the on and off. The ability that this is a very strong drug, and of course, when we talk to opiates, we're talking about a whole new classification of addiction, or just how much your body relies on that drug. When you talk about sobriety, and we're going to hear the story of going on and off, you guys know that. Are you disappointed when people who go back to using or fall off the wagon, or is it all part of a process?
I think the most simple answer I can give is that every single person's path to recovery from addiction is different. Some people go to treatment one time and they get it, and they never go back to using. Other people use and get into treatment, use and get into treatment over and over again and die. And so the benefit, we have a stronger cure than I think we've ever had, but it is always disappointing when people are not successful. I think the most important thing that we can do and people who are suffering can do is maintain hope that if they come back, they can get it.
There has been much made about local law enforcement and also, national politics as is playing out now, and what the course of action should be from the standpoint of the country, policy, drug policy, and the like. Treatment sometimes gets ignored. Because law enforcement will get more money. There'll be more research put into how do you stop maybe the drug makers. We've seen this about drug traffickers and what the penalty should be. But the idea of treatment and mental health facilities and all that area seems to always be deprioritized. Why is that?
At first, I'd say that you're right. There's an estimate of 30 to 60 million people who need treatment in this country right now, and only about 3 million people get it. And the people who do receive it are typically not getting as much as they should get. And I think we have been in a cycle of really treating this as a criminal problem rather than a public health problem. And it's easier to address law enforcement. But people in law enforcement know that really this is a public health crisis. And so I believe that this needs to be a multi-pronged approach.
Does the industry, when we talk about treatment, do you have to become more of a lobby? Do treatment facilities and just the overall behavioral science that goes into treatment, do you have to play the political game to make sure that any policy that's going forth when it comes to drugs at the national level is including treatment?
Without any question. And we do that every day. But even things like what we are doing today is one of the things that if we can change the public opinion, that's typically what leads to policy change. And that's what we really have to focus on.
And I want to introduce Spencer. Spencer is someone who has used Gateway and has really had a life since an early age involved with drugs and alcohol and also being sober and falling off the wagon. And we're withholding his last name. But Spencer, thanks for being here. I appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Right at the top when I read your story. Is it accurate? Do you feel like, God, I'm listening to my life right in front of me?
It is. It's kind of embarrassing, but it is accurate.
All right, let's start it off. Let's talk about this. We hear this a lot because we've heard for years about gateway drugs and, you know, how people get started. But at a young age, at the age of 13, you started using marijuana.
I did.
Tell us about that. Take us back to that moment.
I probably had one friend in school, and I noticed the popular kids were always smoking weed, not going to gym class, and they just looked cool. They looked like the people in the movies. And eventually I manned up, if you will, and tried it. And people who use drugs don't discriminate. As long as you have money, they'll be your friend.
Money plays a big part of your story as well. And the reason I say that is a lot of times, and Dr. Britton, you backed this up too, the public example or the stereotype when it comes to at least opiates is that it's someone who's down and out, who's poor, might be someone of color who's, we in Chicago have the tent cities that are right along the river. That's not how, those people are living under the underpass, under the Kennedy Expressway. That's not me. But in the case of opiates and what we've seen, it's affecting a lot of people that don't live like that.
And if I can add something to that, the primary drug of use in the country right now is still alcohol. You know, it is simply that opiates are so much more obvious because people are dying so quickly. And I think it is really, really critical to understand that, like Spencer said, addiction doesn't discriminate at all. They can look like you, they can look like me, they can look like anybody. But the large percent of people that have it don't look like they do.
All right, back to your story, Spencer. Did it take that experience of seeing the cool kids in the gym class smoking weed, did you get hooked, that it became a big part of your life?
Instantly. 13, I only had like $20 a week, and I thought I was living large at the time. But I would try anything to get more money so I could hang out with more people and be welcomed.
Was it easy to get?
Surprisingly, yeah.
Really? It was just, you knew where to go, you knew how to get it?
Kids have older siblings, and yeah, it's really easy.
So, we talk about 13 years old and 13 and as a teenager, beginning your high school career, all this was happening, but it first was marijuana, but it quickly moved to other drugs. Talk about when that happened, this idea of going from marijuana to something bigger.
Marijuana got boring, and I started experimenting with alcohol and cocaine, and that was great. I fell in love with it. More people were doing it. Weed was looked down upon, and it was more accessible because parents had it. The alcohol part.
Well, let's talk about the cocaine part, because what was it about that drug that hooked you? What was it about the feeling and everything that was involved in that? Because that is you start to get to a point where now you're talking about a drug that can easily end your life, or a drug that is going to at least be in a situation where you're going to have a lot of ups and downs.
You feel like Superman when you do cocaine. And I was a chubby kid, so I was losing weight. So I was just seeing all the pros. I wasn't looking at the cons, like fights with my parents, not having any money, being reckless. I was just focused on the pros.
When I talk about the cons, what were physiologically that there's the downs are down, right? I mean, that's the idea that you constantly want it again because the hangover, if you will, is so bad.
It's an emotional hangover. You contemplate suicide. You regret doing it in the first place, you regret everything. And the only way to feel better is to do more.
It's also a very expensive drug.
Super expensive.
Where did you get the money?
I started to steal to support my habit. However I could, from whoever. Neighbors, family members, kids, organizations, whatever I could get my hands on. All my morals out the window.
For you to be a 15, 16-year-old kid on the North Shore of Chicago, were you starting to develop a reputation at this point when you start to get into the drugs? Are people recognizing you? Are you a bad kid?
Definitely. I was labeled a cokehead, and I was upset that they called me a cokehead even though I was doing cocaine, so it fit.
Right.
But it's just the stereotype that you were talking about, like being under a bridge or wearing ratty clothes. I was wearing really nice clothes, surrounded by friends who had Mercedes. Just, it's not the picture that everyone paints.
Mm-hmm. At that time, if you take us back to, because the next step is going to be the one that is going to take you into the world of opiates, but at that time when you start to get labeled and you start to be judged and people, there's also run-ins with the law. Tell us, how did that feel? How does it feel for a 15-year-old kid to be labeled in that way?
I embraced it. I was high all the time, so I didn't really care. I had a giant F you attitude towards the world, and I just kept going.
Let's get to the opiates. 16, 17 years old, you say cocaine. Yeah, cocaine is out and heroin is in.
Yeah.
How'd that come about?
It was an accident. This probably sounds like an excuse, but in my mind I feel like it was. I went to a house to get my coke, and they had heroin instead. Tried it. Fell in love. I got super sick the first time, but I immediately liked it. And
were you trepidatious? Well, everyone knows at this point you're a savvy kid. You're 17 years old. You know what's going on in the world where heroin addictions are not anything to play with, life and death situations. Was there any part of you, even with the cocaine habit and obviously being doing drugs since you're 13 years old, that was reticent to say, yeah, let me try this?
Slightly. At that point, I didn't care anymore. I'd been living this lifestyle that I chose, and I just kept going. And from what I saw on TV and film and radio, with heroin, you get sick after a few hours. And so, based on that information, I had to get more. I didn't even let my body get time.
So you had essentially done enough research to know that you wanted to avoid the withdrawals. You wanted to say, I'm just going to do heroin and just skip the down part.
Even though I highly doubt I would have gotten sick.
Is that, Dr. Britton, is that a normal scenario for someone using heroin, that they recognize they're going to get sick and so they're always on the chase for the next thing to avoid that?
I think the hardest thing about it is, it's really kind of a train that's tremendously hard to get off, because whether you see it or not, you use and then you feel sick, and you know that if you don't use again, you're going to keep feeling sick. And if you picture like the worst flu you've ever had, that's what it feels like. Muscle aches, nausea, all of that. And there's an immediate fix.
Is that's how you looked at it?
It's the flu on steroids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the worst part is, once you actually are physically sick, you know the solution. Mm-hmm. You know how to feel better.
There's no light at the end of the tunnel except for doing heroin again.
Right.
Another expensive habit, and when you start getting into heroin use, you start drawing a lot of attention. The law enforcement gets involved, the long history of arrests. You're thrown out of New Trier.
Yep.
Obviously, many people fight their lives to get into that school. Was this something that you said, I don't care, and I'm going to keep doing this? Or was there ever a point when you were 18 years old that you said, I'm going to do this for another month and I'm going to find my way out?
I kept putting time limits on when I was going to get clean. And that weekend when I said I would detox and all that on my own, which never works, I would be in the worst pain I've ever felt, and I would go right back to it. So I just couldn't handle it.
When you first are entering a rehab facility and the goal is to get off of heroin, what is that like? What is that experience? And what is your mindset?
Well, luckily I had the resources to go to California for a treatment. A lot of people don't. But I was angry. I was forced to do it. I believe I wasn't ready. I went there surrounded by redwoods. I was saying how disgusting it was. Where are my buildings? Because I'm from Chicago, even Wilmette. And I was just angry. I was counting down the days of how long I had to be there so I could use again. By then, I was mentally in love with the drug.
So none of it was sticking? Like everything that they were talking to, the counselors, the idea of taking you out of that, the environment, essentially eliminating the drug, all of it was show for you until you get back to it.
Right.
Is that common? Is that something that with a lot of drug users, they're able to play the game and understand that they're there for a second, but they know the minute they get back, they can get back to their lives?
I mean, Spencer's experience is certainly common. You know, the hard part is there's a cultural belief that if you don't choose to go, you know, they're never going to benefit. The research actually says that people that are mandated to go to treatment do better than those who are not mandated. And I think primarily that's because they stay in treatment longer. You know, the biggest indicator of relapse is, you know, short stays. And so we treat 6,000 people a day. We're the largest provider in the country. And so, you know, what providers like Gateway do, they really try to engage the people whether they're resistant or not. You know, they meet them where they are. And, you know, I think the most important question for Spencer is really, what happened that made it finally click? That's what's unique.
What happened?
I can't put words to it. I was just finally done suffering. Thank God, thankfully.
You had a life scare, and a lot of times you know, this is always part of the process when it comes to drug abuse, but when you were 25 years old, you had a heart attack and fell into a coma. It was 50-plus days in a coma for trying to go cold turkey off of meth, right? That's Methadone. So explain it to me. Explain what went down, what you remember from that situation at the age of 25.
I got onto methadone trying to quit heroin once again by myself without treatment.
So you were essentially trying to get off of heroin.
Correct. And that's a daily medicine that you take, and I was on a high dose, and one day I didn't take it. I thought I could do it, and I had a heart attack, and I just remember waking up in a room, people calling me noodle legs, and having to learn my parents' names again. It was terrible.
So it was 2 months or so of being in a coma, and you woke up like it was yesterday.
Yeah, I don't remember it.
For you, that experience, the experience of obviously you have proven, even in the story that you're telling, is a lifetime of trying to get off of the drug and a lifetime of succumbing to go back on the drug. It's this sort of yo-yo experience. Is that accurate for all the stuff we skipped from the age of 18 to 25 and where you're at now? But this idea that you have spent a life of wanting to get rid of the drug, but succumbing to the drug.
I want it so much that I'll fight so hard to get high and get my drug or get my alcohol. And then I'll get like too deep into it, instantly regret everything. And it's like trying to swim against the current. Like, you're already down there. You're screwed. You need a lifeguard to come save you. You can't do it by yourself.
Why did you think you could? After being in rehab, in and out of rehab, knowing that many people probably have said to you along the way, you can't do this by yourself. But there you are at the age of 25 trying to do it by yourself.
I don't think I believed I could. I was more embarrassed to ask for help, tell people I had a problem. So I would try and do it on my own, and I would always fail.
You've mentioned it a couple times about embarrassment, right? And the emotion that goes into this. How much do those emotions, embarrassment or fear, anxiety, people finding out, how much of that, and looking in hindsight, how much of that fed into the fact that you went back and used again? How much does embarrassment and fear and those emotions play into the story of your life?
So much. And I'm just trying to ignore all those feelings by using it and masking it with drugs and alcohol. Because you don't think of that when you're high or drunk. You think you're a model student again, or a model citizen.
You know, for you, having to relearn your parents' name. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, you know, you had to learn how to use a fork, utensils.
The bathroom.
The bathroom. During that process, and it's a lot for listeners right now who are listening to this who may say, I can't even imagine that. Are you introspective? Are you retrospective? Are you thinking, oh man, I can't believe the choices I made to get here, and once I'm able to pick up this fork and figure this out, I'm done. I'm going to go to are those thoughts in your head, or are those something for a different time, different day?
A different time, different day. I was thinking about my next drink when I was in the hospital bed. As soon as I could think clearly. Because I felt like I deserved it after being put in there. Because it wasn't my fault. It was everyone else's in my mind.
It was. So, again, I guess we go back to the same question, right? When did the light bulb go off? I know it's hard for you to find that moment, but it sounds like as we tell your story that we're getting a cumulative effect to understand that there are a lot of things that led up to this moment where the light bulb would go off. Do you see it that way? Do you see that this is a lifetime to make the light bulb click? Or was there something specific that said, you know what, I'm done with this cycle?
Like I said before, I can't pinpoint what it was that finally clicked. After I had the coma and the hospital stay, I continued daily drinking and using, and I was probably in and out of hospitals for seizures from detoxing 4 or 5 times.
So to get this right, after all that happened in the coma and learning how to say your parents' names again and use a fork, you went back to using?
Of course.
So let's talk about Gateway. You know, you are celebrating 1 year sober. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I would imagine that means the world to you, in the sense that you have tried throughout this story and the story you're telling us tonight at different occasions to get this done. You've now had the opportunity to do that. Why do you think it's sticking? What is it about this time around, what you've been doing in the last year, that's different than the times before?
I'm putting in work. I've been sober before. I didn't try to keep it. I've had years before, and one relapse can take you right back to the beginning, and you lose everything. I constantly work on myself and stay connected on a daily basis.
That is a powerful statement, this idea that there have been years before. And it's a tremendous accomplishment to have been sober for a year. But you're very well aware that could easily go up in smoke with one decision. How do you keep that decision at bay?
I just have to be aware that it can happen. Drugs and alcohol are out there. And I think a healthy bit of fear, knowing what's out there, is good for someone. Good for me.
Dr. Britton, I asked that question to you as well. I mean, when you're dealing with people who are in recovery and they now having accomplishments like Spencer is at a year's time, you have to balance the celebration part of it with the fact that there's still work to be done, because 1 year in Spencer's time is a tremendous accomplishment, but you also, as he just said, I mean, it could be over. So how do you at Gateway balance the pride and the diligence?
I think we should celebrate every moment for what it's worth. I think that the celebration and the recognition of the significance are separate. And so what we know is that people who stay actively engaged for treatment for a year, for example, have 85% or so recovery rates. Those who are 90 days or less have about 30% recovery rates. And so there's something magic about maintaining the relationship on an ongoing period, and I think that's why Spencer's clean today. But I think that the other thing is that there are those people who cross the line in which they can't go back to being a normal person, that they are going to have the disease of addiction for the rest of their life. And just like if I have heart disease or diabetes or something like that, I do maintenance. It doesn't mean my life's not fun. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean I don't have jobs and wives and children, but it means I need to do something to maintain my recovery, or else it will come back.
When you hear that, does that make sense to you, Spencer? Is that the concept that this disease is with you? This is something that is going to be with you and it defines you
For the rest of my life.
For the rest of your life. How do you approach that?
Like any other disease, you have to treat the disease. Like what Tom was saying, you get cancer or you get strep or cold, you're going to do everything in your power to get better. What makes addiction different?
Mm-hmm. Well, here we are defining your life through these terms. You're on the radio with me right now. We're talking about decades of your story and those stories really going to the worst parts of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does addiction do to you to define you? You know, you'll go through all those experiences and you've been tremendous in the sense that you've got a 1 year clean and sober. But what does it take out of you? Who are you as opposed to when you were 13? To talk about what addiction does to you when you're clean and sober.
I wouldn't say it defines me. I say it definitely has taken a lot out of me. But it's like a soldier that has gone to war. You have the stories, but you just got to keep going forward. Now, I love volleyball. I say that defines me. I love my sister, my parents. I love life.
There might be some people listening tonight that, not unlike what we talked about a little bit earlier, see this as a criminal thing, not a recovery thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
They may be texting in right now or calling in saying, you made your bed. You made your choice, you know. How do you look at your life in the way that you have struggled with addiction, struggled with heroin, struggled with opiates, and you're still here?
Well, you got to get off the stereotyping of what addiction looks like. I know surgeons, pilots, lawyers, doctors, TV hosts, everyone in this world, I feel, is connected to someone who is working on addiction. If you look around, it's a silent killer. Like, you never know who's struggling with it. They could be serving you your coffee right now, redoing your bathroom. We're all around.
Spencer, I can't thank you enough for coming in and telling your story. I know it's hard, man. And, you know, I guess I asked the question at the end, like, having this experience to talk on the radio for this hour, is it cathartic? Is it feel good? Does it feel bad? Like, what is the emotion that's attached to telling your story?
Well, I've already lived it, so I know it. It's crazy. I never thought I'd be in a radio station or a radio studio, and I'm just happy to be here.
Dr. Britton, and I thank you as well for coming in and sharing the microphone with Spencer. You know, as this becomes more and more of a mainstream story, and it seems that it is, meaning every day there's new stories and eye-opening statistics that come out about opiates and opioid addiction. What do we need to know? Is this going to be the defining crisis of our time?
I think the most important thing, you know, the beauty of your job is that you have power to change lives, literally. And there are people listening right now that either personally are suffering from this or have somebody they love who's suffering from this, or who's suffering from it and they don't know that they're suffering from it. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing that they can walk away with is that there's a solution, and that no matter how scared they are, no matter how little hope that they have, they don't need hope to recover. They don't need to be scared anymore, that there's a solution. You know, companies like Gateway are here to help. You know, Spencer's an example of that, and, you know, I have a lot of faith in the Spencers of the world.